Ah, look who joined us. As I thought, your voice can't reach us here. Now I'm certain of where your heart is.
Ever since I played Melody of Memory, I have been stuck day and night trying to figure out and make sense of how and why certain events happening involving Sora and all the Quadratum stuff happen. Not only the significance or the possible context for things, but also the order of events for these moments, as trying to piece them together in a single coherent timeline is absolutely messy. But I think to make the most sense of these cutscenes, we're going to need to answer a few questions. 1. Why is the Master so close to Sora during the secret ending? 2. What's the context surrounding Sora and Yozora meeting? And 3. What's Sora's current condition right now? I'm going to attempt to be answering these questions in this latest theory, but first let's try and list out all the key plot points in order for us to make sure that we make sense of the whole scenario. In Kingdom Hearts 3, all of the Guardians of Light fell. However, thanks to Sora piecing himself together thanks to Kairi and using the power of waking, he was able to revive the Guardians of Light. This caused a singularity event and a small tear in the fabric of time, which allowed Sora to override a future where the Guardians fell to a future where they don't fall and actually succeed. However, young Xehanort, Mickey, and Chirithy all explain to Sora that him using the power of waking like this will lead him to being banished from their world. Sora, despite knowing the consequences, uses the power of waking like this one more time in order to revive Kairi and later disappears. After that, we see Sora in 3 different cutscenes involving Unreality. First, in the Kingdom Hearts 3 secret ending, Sora is seen waking up in the streets of Quadratum, a city in Unreality. Second, Sora is seen waking up in a night final world and is conversing and fighting with Yozora, a resident of Unreality. And lastly, Sora possessing Kairi to fight Master Xehanort, who confirms that Sora is in Unreality due to his voice not reaching. Like I said, the context of the scenarios are left ambiguous, so it's tough to look at the meaning and the reasoning for why these things are the way that they are. So let's first try and do our best to make sense of each cutscene. First, Sora waking up in Shibuya. This is the first cutscene we see involving Sora after he disappears, and yet this is probably the hardest to make sense out of. Had the other 2 cutscenes in particular not been there, it probably would have been real easy to make some sense of the whole thing, but unfortunately that's not the case. Something that really makes this tough to make sense of is that both the good and the bad ending of Kingdom Hearts 3 secret ending contradict Sora's condition in that secret episode. Melody of Memory may be one thing, but the secret episode throws everything out of whack. We see Sora waking up in the middle of the street in Shibuya, which isn't where he fell compared to his location in the secret episode, and not only that, but since we also see Riku wake up in Shinjuku at the same time, it's safe to assume that this has happened at least after Limit Cut's ending, as well as Melody of Memory's ending. And we know this whole thing can't be Riku's dream, since Riku only describes his portion of the secret ending when talking about his dream. Also, given Yozora's wording in the secret episode, wouldn't it make more sense for Yozora to be near Sora and not Riku, since his orders were to save Sora? Why would he be near Riku? I have suggested before that the Yozora we see in the Kingdom Hearts 3 secret ending may be darkness possessing Yozora's body and not the actual Yozora, and this is given Yozora's wording that his current appearance isn't his own, which is still likely, but it could also be possible that Yozora is simply checking on Riku and making sure that he doesn't interfere with his goals. But we do need to consider that Yozora is also very likely working with the Master of Masters, since we do see him in the secret ending. One person would keep their eye on Sora, and the other person would keep their eye on Riku. I get the feeling that Sora was probably at some point found by the Master and sent to a specific spot in Shibuya, and I will make sense of this later, but for now, let's actually move on to the next important scene. Sora versus Yozora. This is the most we see of Sora after he disappears and is probably the most popular of them all. Sora arriving here is pretty interesting as, first off, it's a nighttime version of the final world, something we have never seen before, and it's not even fully clear whether or not this night final world is the actual final world or something else, especially considering that this is all probably a dream or something to that effect, considering Yozora's statement,
"No, this isn't the real world."
And there's something interesting I thought about when it comes to Sora meeting Yozora, and I can't help but relate this last thing happening in Kingdom Hearts 3 story to the first thing in Kingdom Hearts 3 story, the tutorial. The tutorial is an interesting bit of Kingdom Hearts 3, considering that we don't even know exactly when the tutorial happens, considering it leaves clues suggesting its timeline placement, and since the Ultimania's translations are a little wonky, it's not even fully clear when the tutorial takes place. Some people have suggested that the tutorial takes place before Sora returns to Yanset's Tower at the start of Kingdom Hearts 3, but the thing is, why would Sora be heading to the Station of Awakening? He was in the Sleeping Worlds, but it doesn't seem likely. We also need to consider that if this was happening during early Kingdom Hearts 3, consider this line stated by the mysterious voice. 7 hearts? Well, if we think about it, there were only 5 hearts that everyone knew that they needed to save. Terra, Ven, Aqua, Roxas, and Naminé. 6 if you include Xion, even though no one remembered her at the time. Lee was already saved at this point, so that kind of disproves this happening before Kingdom Hearts 3. Another possibility is considering that the tutorial takes place during Sora's attempt to save the Guardians. First off, this would mean that this would have to happen after Sora first pieced himself together in the final world. Then the lines that there are 7 hearts that need saving adds up. There's Riku, Mickey, Ventus, Donald, Goofy, Aqua, and Lee. That's 7. Except there were 8 people that Sora needed to save because Kairi. Sora was under the impression that Kairi needed to be saved. Another piece of evidence that suggests this doesn't take place when Sora is saving the Guardians is the line during the Remind episode.
"Hey, I've already restored 6 hearts. What's one more?"
6 hearts? Looking at all the times we have saved the Guardian, the number should be 7. And this isn't some throwaway joke about Sora not being able to count, since Chirithy confirms that the number is indeed 6.
You've done that 6 times before.
And I've also went ahead and checked, and it's not even a translation issue, as both characters say 6 as well in the Japanese dub. So how could that be possible? For a while I couldn't make sense of this. We see Sora save 7 Guardians, but he only restored 6 hearts? The only thing I could think of is that one of the Guardians didn't need to be restored for one reason or another. And the only person that I think could fit that bill is actually Riku. Riku has been stated to have a certain resistance to darkness. While yes, we do see the Lich trying to make off with his heart, I think a combination of Riku being a Dream Eater, because remember, hearts that fall to darkness fall in a state of sleep, and Riku having a resistance to darkness kept him from being needed to be restored. At least not like the others. Another thing that doesn't make sense for this to happen when Sora is trying to save the other Guardians is the fact that we see Sora opening up a sleeping keyhole. So this would suggest that Sora went to the Station of Awakening after opening that sleeping keyholes. But the thing is, sleeping keyholes have only ever been used to travel to a world, namely the Sleeping Worlds, not someone's Station of Awakening. Heck, look at Riku when he goes to Sora's station in Dream Drop Distance. He uses a portal, not a sleeping keyhole. And he only uses a sleeping keyhole to enter/exit the Destiny Island inside of Sora's heart. Kinda like how the Guardians use a sleeping keyhole to enter Xehanort's Dream Scala at Kylam. Also, this is Sora's own Station of Awakening. All he would need to do is just go to sleep or just access the depth of his heart, which doesn't even require a keyhole. So sleeping keyholes can't be used to access a station, especially your own, based on what we have seen. And not only that, it just doesn't make sense. So this can't have taken place before Kingdom Hearts 3 starts, and it's not likely that it's taking place when Sora is saving everyone near the end of Kingdom Hearts 3, so that only leaves after Kingdom Hearts 3, after Sora disappears. Heck, depending on the translation, this is what Nomura said is what happens during the tutorial. Again, the ultimated translations can be a little wonky, so take this with a grain of salt. So how does this relate to Sora meeting Yozora? The thing that really helped me connect the two different scenes is actually, one, when Yozora conjures up the world of Shibuya, he actually first summons Sora's station, meaning that Yozora was able to connect with Sora's heart. And the tutorial does take place at Sora's station. So it's possible that sometime around going to Sora's station, he connects with Yozora, especially since in the tutorial he ends up in the final world, which is also where he is at when he meets Yozora. And second piece of evidence is the dark side that appears. Now, the idea of us facing a dark side isn't all that insane to think about, but it's the fact that this dark side is oddly different, as we can all see. Instead of being all black, he's only really black in his hands and feet. And he is kind of transparent and has this weird water effect to him. This tells me that this dark side might not even be an actual dark side, but maybe a creation made by someone to subdue or beat Sora. It's also safe to assume that whoever made this dark side is probably the mysterious voice in the tutorial. I initially pointed at the master, but I now kind of think it's Yozora. What made me look at Yozora was not only the point I made earlier about Sora's station, but when fighting Yozora again, I noticed something interesting. During Yozora's DM, Yozora creates Gigas to attack Sora. The interesting thing about them is actually something that is kind of hard to notice, but if you look closely, the Gigas aren't exactly the ones that we see in the toy box or even in the Vamrex minigame. The Gigas appear to have a strange water aesthetic to them, almost like they're made of water. And what else has the same aesthetic in their design? The dark side. So what I think is going on is that Yozora is trying to keep Sora subdued for the time being, or maybe is testing him and creating the Heartless and the dark side to show up and attack him. So it's possible that after losing to Yozora, Sora's put in a state of sleep and experienced the tutorial by Yozora. But we're not done analyzing cutscenes yet. There's one more cutscene we need to look at. Sora saving Kairi. The last time we see Sora, at least as far as game releases go, is in Melody and Memory, when Phantom Xehanort tries to attack Kairi, but Sora temporarily possesses her and fights on her behalf, except Sora's voice can't be heard because of where he is. This is an interesting cutscene, as you gotta wonder, how did Sora pull this off? He has never possessed someone like this before, and doing it so flawlessly, I might add. I think it's mainly because of his connection to Kairi, but based on what we see in the secret ending and in the secret episode, this couldn't have happened after either of those, as it was because of this encounter that Riku could go to Quadratum in the first place. And regardless of the good or bad ending, Sora's position at the end of either of those doesn't add up with him saving Kairi. So this must be the first event that happens among everything, right? It makes sense, but there's also something interesting about this interaction. During Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, the master states that not only do voices not reach, but eyes don't either. So how is Sora perfectly able to fight Xehanort and retrieve the last fragment of Kairi's heart if he can't see? The only possible way to explain this is if Sora was in a state of sleep. This would mean that while Sora may be in Unreality, because he is in a state of sleep, he wasn't entirely bound by the laws of the normal world. It's similar to how during Dreamed Up Distance, Riku was in the real awake world that never was, but not only was his appearance still his Dream Eater appearance, but he still had access to his Dream Eaters during his fight with young Xehanort. Yet, he was still able to interact with Mickey and the others. Or how Sora still retained his Dreamed Up Distance appearance while in the room where nothing gathers before Riku came to pick him up, and his Dream Eater was still out and about. Even though we know for a fact that this was in the real world. So that could help explain how Sora was able to pull off possessing and fighting Master Xehanort, despite the fact that he shouldn't be able to see anything in regular reality. So now that we have taken a good hard look at all of the three cutscenes, let's do our best to try and make a coherent timeline of events in order for us to try and make sense of what we see when it comes to Sora. Firstly, after Sora is banished to Unreality, he is essentially put in a state of sleep, so he is essentially in a comatose state after he is banished. Next, Sora can feel Kairi's heart in danger and helps her outfight Master Xehanort. Next, Sora is approached by Yozora, who contacts his heart via his dreams, and he loses to Yozora and he gets put into crystal stasis. Then, Sora goes to a station of awakening while in stasis, where he can feel and briefly connect with Riku's light, who happens to be entering Quadratum at the time, which helps bring him out of stasis. Then Sora challenges Yozora again, except he wins this time and makes his way to the final world. Sora is then woken up by someone, presumably the Master, and is dragged to the awake Unreality. Lastly, Sora then wakes up in Shibuya. This is my absolute best way of establishing a timeline of events with what we see with Sora after he disappears. I think this is truly what happens, but it's only a matter of time before we find out what truly happened to Sora after disappearing. Well guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you guys really liked this theory that I've been able to push out. I've had so much stuff on my plate lately. It's a miracle I was able to get this out. But thank you all so much for your support. I hope you all are enjoying this 20th anniversary event. Make sure you guys rate, comment, and subscribe. Check out my Twitter, my Twitch, and my Discord. A link will be in the description below. This has been Noir Low Bomber, and I'm out.